Thank you so much for the introduction, and I am honored to be here talking to you and feeling in the presence of real being after being on Zoom forever. So, and I really enjoyed your talks in the past 1 or 2 days. Learned a lot about your research, and also learned that it's very difficult when you are focused on your research to think about the other implications of responsible AI in the work that you're doing. And that is a lot because as a researcher, I was focused in my research so that I would see the issues that my research would cause, and also I had my biases. So in today's talk, I'm hoping to give you a bigger picture of what we consider for responsible AI in Microsoft, and kind of elements that you would consider when you are thinking about doing your research responsibly. And at this point, I need to figure out how to go next. Is this the clicker? Oh, awesome. Okay, great, thank you. Got it. Okay, I will talk a little bit about why responsible AI, and I will focus more on how we do responsible AI, at least one way that we do in Microsoft, and the overall structure and governance around it. And I want to talk a little bit about the opportunities that as researchers you will have with some pointers to research areas that could be interesting as you take the next step in your career. So if you have been following news, you know that 2023 has been pretty much an inflection point for AI, particularly because of the introduction of generative models. And the growth of AI has proliferated a lot of use in almost every industry, from healthcare, manufacturing, financial services, retail, and almost has touched everything. However, there's a lot of issues, as we talked about in these past 2 days, not only with the generation or creation of the AI model itself. For example, we know a lot of issues with harms within their facial recognition systems, but also, even with a pretty good model that is perfect, it can have dual use. So you can have a facial recognition system that works in a way to help children communicate with their children with visual impairments, communicate with their friends and society on the left. And on the right, you can have the same system, assuming that they have the perfect performance, being used for surveillance and identifying protesters. So there is not only inherent problems in the AI system, but also how it gets used in the bigger context. And because of this nature, obviously, societal expectation around the use of AI systems and also the safety of AI systems have increased. If you look at the AIC repository, it shows a 26-time increase in incidents or unsafe behavior of AI systems in the past, since 2012. And I would take this chart itself with a little bit of, with a grain of salt, because I checked the data and they kind of mix a little bit of years here and there. But I definitely encourage you to take a look at the repository because it gives you an idea of what can go wrong. One of the prominent examples of one of the incidents reported to this database is, for example, deepfake showing Ukrainian president surrendering. That is a big deal for creating misinformation. And then we all agree that responsible AI is an imminent need. However, there's a lot of challenges to solve this problem. For one, because responsible AI is a socio-technical problem. And so you can't work in the lab, maximize your accuracy, maximize your performance, and then expect that when this thing goes out of the lab, it will be showing the same performance. So when you're designing your research, I definitely encourage you to think outside of the lab when you're using benchmarks and your algorithm shows perfect results on the benchmark. Think a little bit broader. When this thing goes out in the world, what will happen? If you want to go a step further, you would think about how can this thing be misused? So this can show a lot of great performance. However, it can also be misused. What can I do to mitigate those scenarios? And to top of the challenges that we face in responsible AI is that AI field is growing very fast. And by the time that you figure out what to do with the previous generation of AI systems, the next AI system is in your lab. And now you have to figure out a lot of new emerging capabilities and build mitigations around that. Suffice it to say that at Microsoft, we've had a more than 7-year journey of responsible AI and a huge army of people working on it. And still, they've had milestones, great accomplishment, but still we are learning and we are improving. So it's nowhere close to being done. So to give a structure over how, or elements of responsible AI that we want to think about, is that we want to think about, at Microsoft, we have these principles and we adhere to them. We want to think about accountability, transparency, fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security, and inclusiveness. But we can all agree that, okay, nice, principles are all good, but they're not self-executing, and they also don't tell us how to do things. So we need to build a system, an infrastructure to enact these principles. And at the foundation of the structure for enacting principles, we need a governance infrastructure. And for that governance basically helps build policies and processes around how to implement these the requirements that I will talk about later. In the governance piece, we follow a hub and spoke model. And some of you asked yesterday, I think Joel was asking this question, that what is the role of researchers in the responsible AI community in Microsoft? And here's where we heavily rely on our researchers. Ether, which stands for AI and Ethics in Engineering and Research, is basically a cross-company initiative that has a lot of Microsoft research folks in it, and also other researchers from across the company, that we basically go to them and say, we have this new model, it has new capabilities, how can we, can you come up with the risk surface areas around this, and can you come up with solutions that we can mitigate these risks? And then there is Office of Responsible AI that I am in, that we work on policy, governance, and enablement across the company. And there is also RAISE, which is working on building tooling for responsible AI so that it helps engineering team implement these requirements at scale. So if you are interested in doing pure research on AI safety, Ether is a good fit. If you are interested in building tooling for responsible AI, RAISE would be the good fit. And if you're interested in the intersection of policy and technology, then Office of Responsible AI is where it sits. And if you're not interested in any of them, we also have a big community of responsible AI champs, and these champions are kind of within each organization, and they are actually building products. So you can be building products, but you can also be the conduit between the Office of Responsible AI and the product that you're building. And that is the network of responsible AI champions that we have. Let's talk a little bit about rules and standards. So we published Responsible AI Standard in 2022, and I have given a link there. Definitely encourage you to take a look. It goes into pretty much a lot of details. How it breaks down the 6 principles that I talked about into 17 goals. And each of those goals have requirements that basically product teams need to implement. And also it helps engineering teams with tools and best practices to kind of guide them and help them understand the requirements. This is where I want to take a deeper look a little bit. So in one of the talks yesterday, we talked about the bigger picture of thinking about responsible AI as data design piece, but I want to point out that that is only one part of accountability, and that is only one small piece within the accountability principle, that is data governance and management. This is where you make sure that your data is coming from the right sources, is representative, is basically do the management piece properly within this. It has connections with other principles, but it is where it sits, basically. We talked about explainability and interpretability. This goal within transparency, you see there are other goals. This goal within transparency is basically saying AI systems must be understandable and intelligible by people that use them. So interpretability and explainability fall under this category. It also has other elements such as UX design and blah, blah. Thank you so much, Dr. Jagadish, because you covered the fairness piece, so I don't have to go through that. Reliability and safety, we had a talk yesterday talking about resilience, and that would be what falls under goal 1 under reliability and safety. Reliability and safety of goal 1, reliability and safety guidance. The goal of this is basically saying, have you thought about the tail events that could happen? Have you thought about what will happen if I take this system and deploy it in a scenario that has a different environmental, has a different operational setting? For example, if you have tested your system for a computer vision system, will it work in a low light scenario? Will it work if one of the cameras fail? Does it work if this user just replaces the cameras with a low resolution camera? So basically, think about the failures and mitigate those. Fall under this category. Then we talked a little bit about privacy. This falls under privacy and security. Microsoft has its own privacy and security standards, so we kind of link out to subject matter experts for privacy and security. And also there is inclusiveness, which I did not hear many talks about, and inclusiveness is different from fairness, because inclusiveness actually covers things like, have we thought about our systems being accessible, and how we thought about our systems being useful for people with disabilities, and have we tested, have we mitigated that? So basically, making our AI systems accessible to everyone. Let's maybe just zoom in on transparency. So we talked a little bit about interpretability and explainability. Goal 2 is communication to stakeholders. So here we want to tell our stakeholders, this is what we did, this is the capabilities of our systems, these are the capabilities, these are the intended uses, these are the unintended uses, and these are the limitations. And this is how we also provide guidelines to, like, this is how you actually use the system to get the best results. So all of our platform level services are required to have this transparency note that I have put here, one example from GitHub, that they kind of explain what they have done about fairness, what they have not done about fairness, and where the system has limitations, so that the user knows how to use the system. So I encourage you, when you are releasing a model on, let's say, GitHub or on Hugging Face, definitely consider using a model card, because within a model card, you are basically disclosing the intended uses of your system. You are talking about the potential limitations. And within these potential limitations, maybe it connects to your question, Tanya, that, like, what could we cover, what couldn't we cover? So if there is something that we could not cover, this, for one example, could be non-English languages, right? So does the system work equally well for non-English languages? We tested these 5 languages. We did not test these other languages. We expect it to work, but we have not tested that. So we kind of disclose what we have done and what we have not done. And this could be lower quality of service for languages outside of, programming languages outside of Java or outside of C++. It will work, but we are saying that we only tested for these. So being transparent about what your system can or cannot do helps the user understand how to use it the best way. And then another element that not necessarily apply to you because I'm not sure how many of you are UX researchers, but one element of transparency that is important is that your users need to know that they are interacting with an AI system, and how do you disclose that information to them so they don't feel that when they are talking to a bot, that bot is actually a real person, right? So they know that they are exposed to an AI system. And we don't leave the teams with just standards and all of these requirements because that could be overwhelming. We do provide them trainings. We do have best practices. We have guidance that, like, this is how you implement this standard for this specific context. You implement this standard for, let's say, healthcare scenarios, things like that. So there are additional requirements when for a higher stake domains use cases of the systems. And then looking at tools that could be more interesting for you guys. So there, like I said, RAISE focuses, both RAISE and other teams within the company, and RAISE specifically, focus on building toolkits for responsible AI. And they have, you may have seen this responsible AI toolkit that has many elements, for example, error analysis to understand where your system makes more mistakes, so you can mitigate those. You can have fairness assessment. The tool is called FairLearn. There is also Interpret ML, counterfactual analysis, and they also have causal inference and more elements within the action, to inform action. Recently, they added 2 more tools. One is the mitigation library. And mitigation library helps you with when you identify a problem. You can basically use one of the mitigations within the library to just quickly test it. You don't have to go and implement it. So that provides a library. And also they have added a tracker that you can track what happened to the performance when you implemented different mitigations. And if you are a UX researcher, you would be interested in the Human AI Experience Toolkit. That offers guidelines for human AI interaction. It has design patterns that you can use when you're building an AI system that has UX, UI. It has a workbook, and it also offers a tool that generates scenarios to test your human AI interaction failures. Definitely encourage you to look at the guidelines that they put out there. It's publicly available. And they kind of broke it down to different stages of how humans interact with AI systems and what you should do at every stage of this interaction. I want to talk a little bit about opportunities for doing research in the next step of your career. Talking about areas that you could contribute to. So some of these, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means. I just came up with it, but what's top of my mind. I just put it there. Definitely not an exhaustive list. Some of these are long-standing REI challenges, like fairness. Some of them are a little bit newer, like alignment, that basically aligning the AI research with human values. Talk a little bit about each of them. So Dr. Jack covered fairness perfectly, so I'm not going to talk about the quality of service and allocation of resources here. Robustness and reliability. So we talked a little bit about resilience. And what does this mean? That means that is your AI system robust enough to endure a scenario that does not happen usually? It's a once-in-a-century scenario, but your system should respond to that properly. And how can you contribute to that is basically with, for example, benchmarks. So AI systems are kind of saturating their existing benchmarks. So if we had benchmarks that could come up with these failure scenarios, and we can stress test AI systems against those failure scenarios, that would be very valuable to identifying an issue and then building a more robust and resilient system. And then there is another category that falls under this is the adversarial attacks. That is your system robust to adversaries? You may remember that story about stop signs, that if you inject some noise on the stop sign, the computer vision system will not recognize it. And that would be an adversarial attack that doesn't change the stop sign, but if a self-driving vehicle sees that, it does not stop. So it has dire consequences, right? So how can we make models more robust to adversaries and think as an adversary when you are building your AI system? Talking about benchmarks, again, the current benchmarks are kind of being saturated. So, and you know that when there is a new benchmark that AI systems fail on, everybody rushes to fix that issue. So the importance of having this new, more challenging benchmark is very, very important for the community and moving things forward. For example, the truthfulness, truthful QA, if I'm not mistaken. And I say that because it just came to my mind. When that came out and talked about GPT-3 compared to its previous versions, then people were like, okay, we have an issue with these bigger, larger models about the truthfulness in this certain answering legal questions, answering healthcare questions, misconceptions, things like that. So everyone tried to fix that issue, and now it's a basic benchmark added to Big Bench. Provenance and content authenticity, which has been there in different contexts, but has become more and more important with the proliferation of misinformation, and how can we basically add traceability to the generated content with generative AI? So this is also a big open question, that how do we create content authenticity? So C2PA is a good resource to take a look at if you're interested in what are they thinking about standardizing content authenticity and provenance. The alignment problem, I listened to some of the talks, and looks like that we use alignment in different contexts differently. This alignment problem is specifically for generative AI systems, and in general, more powerful AGI, and how we can align these powerful systems with human values. Privacy is a well-known field of research. Honesty and truthfulness, again, these become important with generative systems, that we want them to be honest, or basically state their belief. And one way is to test them for consistency in response to different things. So if they are not giving consistent answers, that means that they are not telling what they believe. And that means that there is something wrong with their honesty. Take these words with a little bit of a grain of salt, because it's still a topic of contention between what does honesty mean for an AI system, what does truthfulness mean, what a fact means, and all of that. But active area of research that we want the systems to not state facts. Talked about explainability and interpretability, and another piece that I want to emphasize on is energy efficient training of AI models. With this large, big models that are just coming up and being used for inference over and over again, how can we make them more energy efficient? How can we reduce their carbon emission? How can we make them more optimized? That's also a very worthwhile area to look at for your research, because that is a connection that you can make between data science, AI, and climate change. And there is a lot more into this. It was just some examples that came to my mind. So forgive me if I forgot some of the important work that you're doing on this list. Here I want to take you out of the responsible AI, because we talked all about harms. So I want to give a breather and tell you a little bit about the good things that we can do with AI. I heard from some of you about AI for Good initiative within Microsoft, so you may be familiar with that initiative. And that includes some of the categories that I have listed here, but I listed a few more for you to take a look at as well. So AI for Good includes AI for accessibility. And for example, in this right-hand side image, I'm showing the Seeing AI app that basically helps people with visual impairment to hear what's happening in a scene when they take a picture from their camera. Right? So it basically describes a scene to people, to blind or low visual people. I also found this story sign very cool, because it creates these animated cartoons based on the books, and they are basically for deaf and kids with hearing impairment, that they help them with sign language. So basically, take the book and translate it to sign language, and they use these very cool characters that I really was like, this is cute, I should put it there. Another category within AI for good is AI for Earth. And this is a little bit different from AI for sustainability, because AI for Earth is pretty much focused on precision agriculture, and also resource management and things like conservation that we will hear about more later today. So these category of work on how can we make better use of Earth resources, or things about like ocean, how can we take care of our oceans, and our habitat related work goes under AI for Earth. So definitely a very interesting area to look at given this situation that we are currently facing with climate change. The Climate Corporation is also an independent, used to be a small startup, but they also do interesting work on increasing yields and using basically helping farmers increase their yield with sensors and data analytics. So things like that are more and more everywhere. Oh, awesome. So Dr. Tanya. Awesome. It's just
we were the flagship technology development partner for AI for Earth.
fantastic, fantastic. So we will hear more about AI for Earth later in this in the afternoon. So I'm so glad that we have Dr. Tanya here. Another part that we usually don't think about is AI for humanitarian action. And within Microsoft, we think about AI for humanitarian action in 4 categories: disaster response, need of children, human rights, and refugees and displaced people. One example that I put here is that Global Emancipation Network has been working with some other companies to stop human trafficking. And they use data analytics, and their work has actually helped with thousands of cases of human trafficking and convictions with human trafficking. So really cool work going on in humanitarian action area. Another category that I wasn't really thinking about until I saw this demo of Common Grounds project, AI for Cultural Heritage. So Common Grounds project is a project that uses AI to reconstruct ancient ruins of Olympia. And without this kind of preservation, we are kind of in the risk of losing this culture and history. So definitely encourage you to take a look at the AI for Cultural Heritage and look at the demo of Common Grounds project, because it gives you an idea of what it looked like 2,000 years ago. And it was very interesting to see that reconstruction, how it works. Another example is Interwoven, and they are trying to use data science to revive art history and visual cultures. AI for health. I heard a lot of talks about use of AI for health, and it ranges, the use of AI in this space ranges from using vision for helping with diagnosis of diseases, all the way to helping healthcare providers with just a better administrative system, so they don't have to do all the administrative work themselves. So that can also be a very good use of AI for bringing more healthcare to more people, because now our providers don't have to put all their time into doing administrative work. I heard some of you are working on AI for health equity, and that is different from AI for health itself, because in AI for health equity, as we heard in the previous talk, one of the biggest problem is access problem, right? So different demographics usually have different levels of access to healthcare. And how can we bring that healthcare to them? For example, here, 2 examples here, ONOS is working on making organ transplant easier and more accessible to all demographic groups. If you look at the data, you will see that non-Hispanic white ethnicity is more than twice likely to receive organ transplant compared to non-Hispanic black ethnicity. So that is a big gap, and one of the work that they are looking at is basically to bring the organ transplant access issue. Going to sustainability, which could be interesting to some of you here. So within Microsoft Research, and also it's also a cross-company initiative. So this one is different from AI for Earth because this is more focused on environmental sustainability, and within it, it basically looks at carbon reduction and greening the grid, and definitely encourage you to take a look at AI for Sustainability on Microsoft and look at the projects. They have several ongoing projects. And these were just a few examples that I wanted to cover, but the point that I'm trying to make is that, remember we talked about the T-shape of your skill distribution. These are the categories that you can think about when you are expanding your data science skills into other categories. And if you are interested in AI for social good, these are some examples that you can be thinking about. Another point, as data scientists / technologists / computer scientists, you are very, very much valued in policy areas. So you are very much valued if you can contribute to helping either public policy makers or think tanks or civil society better understand the technology, better understand its gaps, and come up with ways or proposals for policy. So this is, you can see that number of AI-related bills are just increasing and increasing across the world, and therefore, more and more AI-related policy papers are being published. So if you are interested in the more interdisciplinary work, this is definitely an area that you can lend your expertise as well. Just to summarize, if I want you to remember 3 things from this talk, first is that we rely heavily on our researchers, and building a responsible AI ecosystem requires research, policy, and engineering. And also for enacting these great human-valued principles, we do need a bigger infrastructure of governance, rules and training guidance and tools, and that there are more unsolved problems in responsible AI than solved problems. So definitely encourage you to take a broader look when you are going to the next step of your career and see where your interests better align with what you want to do next. And with that, I stop.
Flip the switch on the side.
Is this better?
Yes.
Right. Thank you. That was a really good presentation. I kind of wanted to pick on one aspect of what you mentioned. When you think about new products and the potential misuses or abuses of these products, what I've seen happen is like there are a lot of examples that come out, but it is mostly like post hoc, like ChatGPT being a very prime example of like technology that came out and then harms were thought about in a post hoc manner. Mm-hmm. And it's not just that, like Twitter has products that has come out in the past, Facebook has made products, and like in general, I think trust and safety is evolving as a field now, but do you have any thoughts on a framework to think about abuse potentials instead of like the example-based approach where the onus is put entirely on the team who designed it to think about, okay, now tell us how this will be misused, which is typically a very hard task because as a designer of the technology, you're not trained or not necessarily trained to think of someone who's going to abuse this. But people out there, it is literally their job to think about abuses and like abuse that technology. There are bad actors who are sitting and waiting for it to happen. So any comments on that can help us out as designers to build better tools?
Of course, yes, that's a great question. So abuse is probably the hardest one to address because you can't always see all the downstream use cases of your work when you're doing research. So 3 things. I will respond to that with 3 pieces. One is higher risk AI systems. We have a framework that we call restricted use scenarios, and things like facial recognition fall under that category. So we kind of know that we kind of enforce this across the company that, for example, facial recognition for these use cases, no, you're not doing that. So the higher risk AI systems, we kind of have that structure that like we are like, this is a yes, this is a no, this is a yes, this is a no. For platform services, if you look at Azure Transparency document, you will see that it restricts the uses of the models for certain use cases. So these are, if you're using it for, if I remember correctly, for journalistic use, for this use, check mark, and there is an application process that you go through and you say, this is my use case, this is what I'm trying to do. There's a free text that you put in at what you're trying to do, and then the reviewers take a look and say, okay, this is aligned with what we want to do, access granted. So that's element number 2. And then the 3rd piece that I wanted to say, and I forgot, so whenever I remember, I'll come back to you. Good.
Hi. Okay. Hi. Thanks for the great talk. It's kind of nice to see like an overview of, basically how big the space is and the scope. I have a question. Like you mentioned, things related to like UX and design on the front end, and there are of course things into kind of algorithm design and things around the data as well. And me, kind of personally, like an interdisciplinary person. I have a background from PhD from human-computer interaction, and then my postdoc at Caltech is kind of a bit more in deep learning and large language models and AI, and I'm trying to put things together. So my question is, how do you see like interdisciplinary collaborations at Microsoft between the UX designers and data scientists, and how does it look like? I know it's not necessarily always that easy actually to do that. So
that's a great point. No, so like you mentioned, the reason that this looks more comprehensive is because we kind of think through the whole life cycle, that from the design, from the data, all the way to like how will users interact with this. There are researchers within MSR who are focused on UX research, and like I explained in that diagram of the governance structure. So we take and they sometimes work directly with the product teams. So for example, we identify this product is very high risk, directly connect them with these UX researchers, and they guide them through each piece of like UX elements that they need to go through and put in. They can even give feedback on like, is a star rating better, or is thumbs up, thumbs down better, or is this other feedback solution better? So they go back and do user studies, come back with results and give answer to that product team. So what I'm trying to say is that they are very much embedded into the system, into the product design for higher risk scenarios, and these are MSR researchers. Within teams, we have a UX designer within teams, and they have a community. So for example, the UX researchers could go in, and for example, for these guidelines that I talked about, they have actually talks that they go in with the UX community, sit down with them, talk them with the guide, and talk them through the guidelines. What you think about when your product comes to you and asks for UX patterns, and the UX patterns actually document that they can like choose and pick which pattern they should choose. So I want to say that there is a hierarchy of like the researchers helping product UX designers to understand what we mean by responsibly, and they go in and they implement that. And there is also direct connections between UX researchers and products. So they play a very prominent role in making the user interaction more responsible. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Yeah. So it's more like, as I understand, it's more interactive. It's not necessarily that you have a step-by-step, like we have an algorithm, then we're going to UX
It's very interactive. It's very, very interactive. It's sometimes too interactive.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's good to hear.